Well, I'm not sure about bringing them to the negotiating table, but I do think it's been incredibly useful to speak honestly to the Palestinians. No one ever has. The optics look bad, right? Disqualifying parties in a liberal democracy that respects the rule of law. Israel is very much concerned about a permanent Iranian military presence on its border. This is what the Israelis do, and they send a very strong message that if you attack us, we will retaliate immediately. And this was a very violent week all throughout the West Bank. This is another fallout from the decertification of the Iran deal, right? This is exactly how the mullahs are responding. Look, it's no secret that Iran and Russia are waiting to see what a post-Civil War Syria will look like. And frankly, the Iranians were never so sure about Assad. You know, he's not a theocrat. He's not an Islamist. You can have justice and human rights, or you can have realpolitik. You can't have both. And Netanyahu is not speaking like a human rights crusader. He's speaking like a prime minister of a nation within a very unstable region. 600,000 Russians have visited Israel. 200,000 Israelis have visited Russia. So there's a true relationship now. This is not the czarist time. But again, it's an unusual ally. I think it's an uneasy relationship. It has a lot to do with their joint efforts in Syria, and I'm not sure it extends to other parts of the Middle East.
Why is it such a milestone, such as a historic moment, as Abbas described it, for the Palestinians?
Well, it is and it isn't. It is historic because never before has the G77 been led by an actual non-state. Right? These Palestinians have had observer status. They have not had state membership status. It took a special vote in order to provide them the opportunity to lead this organization, which shows that they were thinking in this direction anyway. We can't accept this double standard and moral hypocrisy that the one liberal democracy with a pluralistic society, a freestanding press, and the rule of law is the one country that receives 21 out of 27 condemnations. It plays out very much like, you know, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, because Netanyahu's core supporters have the same sort of passion and conviction about him. I mean, Netanyahu could go off into, you know, Rothschild Street and shoot someone, and his core supporters will come. And these are the same people, historically, for your audience to think about, that followed Vladimir Jabotinsky before the creation of Israel. Military readiness, the preparedness of the IDF is the coin of the realm in Israeli society. Prime ministers have lost their jobs and been disgraced forever for not being ready. Remember, at the end of the third war that they had, Operation Protective Edge, there were many Israelis who thought that Israel had no business ending that war without taking out all the rockets and all the tunnels.
There had been some indication that there might be a bifurcation of the peace talks. You might have one set of Israeli-Palestinian peace talks with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, another set with Israeli leaders and perhaps Hamas representatives in Gaza. How do you bring together Hamas and the Palestinian Authority?
You don't. But one of the reasons I think they did this is because Abbas moved out of the peace process altogether. He said once the embassy was moved to Jerusalem, he said, you're no longer, the United States is no longer a fair broker and I don't want to deal with you. So this is what we've had for since the Trump administration's inception, right? We don't have two things happening. Neither of the Palestinian factions will speak to each other, nor will they speak to the United States and Israel. So that's why Israel, and more importantly, the United States, has been looking to Gulf states and Egypt to try to broker a deal. As all analysts are pointing out, how are they going to get the Palestinians to participate?
Well, with economic incentives, that could be the case. What do you think about this idea, try to solve the years-long conflict with numbers, incentives?
It's the way real estate guys think. I've said this before on your show. I mean, it's the way Trump and his son-in-law would think, right? That Palestinians will respond to economic incentives. There's really no evidence of that, right? I mean, there is a long history of evidence of nationalism and the intensity of their enmity for the Jewish state and their desire to return and reacquire Arab lands. This focus on economic prosperity does seem as if to say, look, this is in your best interest. The Egyptians and the Saudis are going to force it down your throat, but it does not appear that the Palestinians are yet buying it.
And it also seems like this is a plan that is also designed to be able to blame the Palestinians should it fail and should the Palestinians not be able to agree on who the representative is.
And they won't, because they don't speak to each other.
And is it designed for Prime Minister Netanyahu, which is another different case?
Well,
we'll have to wait and see.
Perfect for the election that's coming up, because with all of this new talk of the deal, The question is, who will lead Israel?
Right.
Who will respond with the kind of force that rejects a deal that is unfavorable to Israel?
Middle East analyst Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, always great having you here. Thank you.
Both.
Thane, when President Trump made a visit to Iraq, to a military base there, it has to be done in secret. President Hassan Rouhani of Iran, he gets the red carpet rolled and music.
The ironies abound. Remember, the United States liberated Iraq from the clutches of Saddam Hussein. He was the one that was at war with Iran, the mullahs of Iran, for 8 years. Everyone thought now Iraq can actually be free. The United States occupies the country. It eventually withdraws from the country, and then two bitter enemies befriend themselves because the United States is imposing sanctions on Iran.
There were people 20 years ago, 18 years ago, during the lead up to the Iraq War, who were against the war, whether they were in the United States or Israel. They were minority views, but they said, look, if you go to war against Iraq, you will strengthen Iran inevitably, because Iran and Iraq were essentially keeping each other in check. It seems like that's what's happened.
That's exactly what's happened. That's what I'm saying. Ironies abound. I mean, the idea here was always to make sure that Iran does not become a regional power. And now Iran has become a regional power and befriends its mortal enemy, its historic enemy, Iraq. But by the way, for both of these parties, it makes absolute sense because they need trading partners. Now, the crippling sanctions that have been reimposed on Iran, this is working. I mean, this actually proves President Trump that the sanctions would work because they've run out of trading partners. They had to look for Iraq in order to play that role.
So what is the message that Iran and Iraq are sending to the United States by this visit?
That's an interesting question because it is, to a large extent, merely symbolic. This will not rescue Iran. And by the way, one of the reasons the sanctions are working is because Saudi Arabia has been pumping more oil. So this is an ongoing question, right? That, well, why is it working? It's working because Saudi Arabia has stepped up to pump oil. I'm not sure exactly where this leads us to. It was inevitable that this would happen with Donald Trump, who is withdrawing from the region. If he withdraws from Afghanistan, if he withdraws from Syria, vacuums are going to be created.